Hi everyone, my name is Lara Gibney and I'm the Network Coordinator for Dementia Trials Ireland, and I also work as Trial Coordinator in St James's Hospital, which is one of our DTI trial sites. In this session, I'm going to walk you through the entire process of setting up a clinical trial. So this will be from initial contact with the sponsor all the way until green light or actually seeing your first patient. I'll mostly be focusing on industry-sponsored studies, but a lot of the information will still be relevant to investigator-led studies as well. I'd also just like to draw your attention to the little yellow stars, and these are just going to signify the importance of PPI within your clinical trial, and I'll talk a little bit more on this in the next slide. So as I said, I first want to just briefly highlight the importance of PPI. So first of all, what is PPI? It stands for Public and Patient Involvement. And the essence of PPI is to ensure that research is carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. So PPI can be involved in a number of different ways, but essentially they help to shape the quality and relevance of the research. They ensure that we're actually asking the right questions so that research isn't being wasted. And it's important to know as well that they can be involved at every stage of the research process. So PPI members can be those with lived experience of a certain disease, they can be care partners, or they can just be generally members of the public with an interest in the particular disease. So when is the right time to get PPI involved? We would say as early as possible. So if you're running an investigator-led study, you can involve them from protocol development stage. If it's the case of an industry-led study, a great time to get them involved is during your ethics application or your HRCDC applications, which I will talk a little bit about in a further slide. But essentially, if you involve them at these points, you're going to hopefully reduce delays in getting your approvals. So I'm going to run through all the different steps. They definitely don't have to go in order, but it's just to give you an idea of how it typically goes from setup to green light. So typically the first step is going to be your initial contact between the research site and the sponsor to discuss interest in a particular trial. So obviously before sharing sensitive trial information, the site and the sponsor will both sign confidentiality agreements, and this is just to protect confidential data. And this is where you're going to receive your protocol synopsis and a feasibility questionnaire from the sponsor as well. So the feasibility process, it's typically done by an assessment or a questionnaire, and it'll essentially evaluate a number of criteria which will determine whether your site is suitable for this particular trial. So something you'll need to consider is your principal investigator's experience, your access to the patient population that the sponsor is actually looking to recruit. Your protocol will usually include a list of inclusion and exclusion criteria for the study. And based on this, you'll need to decide on how many patients you actually envisage screening per month and how many you can realistically enroll given the time frame that they provide. So the sponsor will also need confirmation that you have adequate facilities and equipment. So this is kind of thinking about your lab, your pharmacy, quiet rooms for assessments, etc. And depending on the protocol, you might need access to imaging centres, so MRI, PET scanners, or you might need staff or facilities to perform lumbar punctures. This is totally dependent on the actual protocol. And lastly, you'll need to consider, do you have the relevant team members? So your principal investigator, your sub-investigator, you'll need a study coordinator or research nurse. You might need a lab coordinator or pharmacists. And something that is kind of particular to dementia trials are the experienced raters, and these will be the people doing the neuropsych assessments. So all of this information is taken into consideration by the sponsor to assess if you're a suitable site for this trial. So if the sponsor is not very familiar with your site, they might ask to do a site visit, and this is just them having a look at your facilities and actually walking through what a patient would see during their visit. It's not always done, but it's just something to be aware of if the sponsor requests to do that. And if the site meets all the criteria that we've just talked about and it passes feasibility assessment, your site has been selected as a trial site. The next step from there is applying for your ethics and getting all your regulatory approvals. So if your trial is an industry-sponsored trial, it's going to be the sponsor that will engage with the NREC, and that's the National Research Ethics Committee. So while it's the responsibility of the sponsor, they may ask the national PI to kind of provide additional information where needed. And then on the other side, if it's in an investigator-led study, you'll want to be applying for ethics through your local research ethics committee. So something that I highlighted briefly earlier is the Health Research Consent Declaration Committee, so that's the HRCDC. So this is the case when patients may lack a capacity to give consent, which can be the case for a lot of dementia studies. The sponsor may need to engage with HRCDC to get approval for this. And again, this will be in kind of support, with the support of the PI. I will say it's really important to engage with the HRCDC as early as possible. It does say in their application that you have to have ethics approval before applying, but I think from our own experiences, there can be significant delays with going through this process. So having that conversation as early as possible with them in kind of an informal way is the best way to do it. You're going to really streamline your process and help reduce delays. And then lastly, I just have the HPRA, so that's the Health Products Regulatory Agency, and this is going to be the sponsor's responsibility as well. So I do have a little yellow star up there. This is your time to involve your PPI. So for both your ethics and your HRCDC, this is where they can get involved in reviewing patient information leaflets and patient-facing materials, anything like that that can, again, help streamline the process and get things approved much quicker. So while all your ethics approvals are in progress, your site can start negotiating budgets and finalising contracts between the site and the sponsor or the CRO or any other relevant stakeholders that are involved. And the sponsor, with the help of the site, will also complete a DPIA, so that's a Data Protection Impact Assessment, and this is usually approved by the site's Data Protection Officer as well. You'll also need to be thinking about your staff training, so making sure everyone has an up-to-date CV, a valid GCP cert within 2 years, so that's your Good Clinical Practice cert. Your staff will likely need to engage with sponsor training for the relevant vendor platforms as well. So this could be the likes of your electronic data capture, your imaging websites, your rater tablets, or your lab systems. And then lastly, you will also need to engage in rater training. So this is for your actual raters. So you'll need raters for the likes of the ADAS COG, the OR-bands, MMSE, ADLs, NPI, etc. You'll also then need to think about, obviously depending on the protocol, do you need a blinded CDR rater? So that's an additional person that you might need to think about as well. So my colleague Evelyn will actually go into the rater assessments in more detail a little bit later on. And then you'll also need to consider maybe setting up some data management processes. So just for example, is the sponsor providing source documentation forms to actually capture the trial data, or do you need to create your own? The sponsor, if it's industry-led, they usually provide the trial master file to your site. However, if you're investigator-led, you might need to gather these documents for yourself. As well, you might need source data agreements, so this is where you'll identify how and where you're actually capturing your source data. And then, of course, if an adverse event occurs, what plans do you actually have in place to ensure this is getting reported accurately and with a timely manner? So really just thinking about having all of these in place before you actually get started. Okay, so if all is going well at this point, the sponsor will conduct what we call a site initiation visit, or an SIV, and this is where training is provided to all your staff on all the protocol requirements. So usually the CRA or the clinical research associate comes in and gives everyone a review on the study protocol, the informed consent process, the data collection procedures, safety monitoring, etc. And this is where all staff are signed on to the delegation log by the principal investigator for all the different tasks that they're required to do. And then finally, last step, if everything has been ticked off at this point, your site is finally green lighted and active and you can commence with first patient, first visit. Okay, so moving on to recruitment. Recruitment and screening in a dementia trial, depending on the protocol, can be quite challenging, I won't lie. Before kind of blindly going into recruiting patients, you'll want to develop some sort of recruitment plan. So really thinking about your patient population and finding out where is best to actually find them. So it might be the case for your study that you are recruiting from memory assessment centres or local memory clinics. It could be the case that you're looking into nursing homes if it's more of a moderate to advanced stage of patients that you're looking for. The other option is existing recruitment groups. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to the little picture on the right. So this is Team Up for Dementia. This is a service run by the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. And it's where people living with dementia or their carers can sign up to be a part of research. So it's essentially matching people to studies or trials that they might be suitable for. So this is actually a great option for recruitment, and it's definitely something to look into if you're struggling to recruit for your study. So as some of you may know, these information leaflets, especially for the industry-led studies, they can be about 20 to 30 pages long, which is very overwhelming for a lot of people. So if you've been referred patients from a particular clinic, your best option is to give them a call directly, give them an overview of the study to really break down the information before sending them out a super long information leaflet. And having spoken to them on the phone, they actually might be more likely to call back and ask for more information or ask questions about the study. So it's really important to do as much pre-screening as possible. And what I mean by this is looking at your inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is available in the protocol, and cross-checking it against the patient's medical history, their medical chart, and seeing if they're actually suitable for this study. So this might be looking at their medical history, their current medications, just their general demographics. And by doing this, you'll hopefully keep your screen fails at a minimum. Okay, so hopefully at this point you've done enough pre-screening on your participant that you have a general idea of who is actually coming into you on the day of screening. Of course, you'll want to make sure that the participant actually has enough time to review the information leaflets before coming in. So typically a screening visit, it'll involve a number of procedures, and most of the time you can actually break these down into separate or multiple visits. This can be quite challenging, so if you're given a tight time frame of a couple of weeks and you need to involve other stakeholders, you need to get MRIs or PETs or lumbar punctures, eye exams, etc. It's really important that you stay organised and schedule these as soon as possible, because as we know, there's long waiting lists for these type of things. So it's really keeping this in mind and trying to get everything done within your given time frame. So prior to any trial activities, the participant is coming in and the PI or the assigned staff member will obtain informed consent from the participant and their study partner if they're involved. If it's the case where the participant has lost capacity to consent, they can be consented, their legal authorised representative can consent on their behalf. And this is really just ensuring that they understand the trial's purpose, all the procedures involved and the risks and benefits, and they have time to ask questions and go through everything in detail. So during your screening, you're going to be going through your eligibility criteria again. So this is your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You're going to be gathering information regarding the patient's medical history. So this will include their dementia diagnosis, any existing medical conditions. You'll want information on the current medications that they're on. This is often quite challenging. Sometimes what the patient reports isn't actually what they're on. You might need to go chasing GPs and get an up-to-date prescription list. So that's something to kind of be aware of as well. During your screening, you'll need to do the neuropsych assessments. So obviously this is as per protocol. It depends on the study and what needs to be done, but For particular studies, there might be certain cutoffs. So, for example, one of the trials that we're doing, the MMSE had to be over 22. So we were recruiting people with early Alzheimer's disease. So obviously, if their MMSE was under that, they were screen failed automatically. So it's being aware of these kind of eligibility criteria, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, doing all the other assessments. So you might need a physical exam, checking vitals, taking bloods, doing imaging. And then something just to highlight as well is screen failures and managing expectations. So dementia trials can typically have quite a high screen fail rate. So it's really important that participants coming in for their visit know that this is the case. You need to kind of manage expectations so they don't automatically assume that they're on the trial, because as I said, screening can take a couple of weeks, and it's important for them to know that these steps are in place and that they could screen fail at any time. So I'm going to pass you over to Ruth Ennis, who will talk about the general coordination of actually running a clinical trial, and we'll both be here at the end to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks so much for listening.